Hi everyone, Josh Jones again, your Michigan criminal defense attorney. Today we're here to talk about the motor vehicle exception. Now, if you haven't already, you may want to be looking at the links below in this on this page and looking at when talking about warrants or other warrantless searches, which I'll make sure to include links for so that you can hear about those in other videos. But today we're talking about the motor vehicle exception, and what that's referring to is whether or is when actually the officer can search your motor vehicle during a traffic stop or even during a different encounter with the motor vehicle. And I say this because not every situation that the officer approaches a motor vehicle in will allow them to search the motor vehicle. So there still is, as I mentioned in another video, that expectation of privacy when we're talking about the motor vehicle. But when we're talking about whether or not they can search, we're looking to see whether or not, again, they have articulable facts that will lead them to have a reasonable suspicion that they'll find contraband or other criminalities within the motor vehicle that they've approached. So let's look at a hypothetical. First, what we need to look at is whether or not the officer has again initiated some sort of stop with the motor vehicle. And that goes back to whether or not there's a traffic stop and whether or not that's valid. Now, even though that doesn't have so much to do with the motor vehicle exception, it does have to do with how the officer creates that encounter with the individual, which really is it's kind of a conversation for a different day and for a different video. So what we're talking about here is officer gets to the vehicle because of a good traffic stop, say the individual is speeding, and the individual officer walks up to the vehicle and smells, let's say, marijuana. Now, at the time, the officer says that they smell fresh marijuana, meaning it's very leafy and fresh. Now, if the officer smells that marijuana coming from the passenger compartment of the vehicle, the main part that everyone sits in, such as the driver and the passenger, then they're going to be allowed to search that area. And if they find nothing, then they have to stop their search. And they're not allowed to then go to the trunk because maybe that's really where the smell is coming from. No, what they have to do is they are only allowed to search through that exception to where the criminality leads them. Meaning if they search and they find nothing in the passenger compartment, their criminality has stopped, or at least their suspicion has, because they found nothing. Now, if we reverse that hypothetical and say that the individual officer did find something in the vehicle that would then allow them to search the remaining compartments of the vehicle and then possibly even to arrest. But what we're looking to is, what is the officer able to articulate in reasonable suspicion of the encounter with the individual, meaning where's the criminality leading them? So if we back up a little bit and we talk about the hypothetical and the officer is looking to possibly search, but maybe they're not searching the compartment. Maybe what they smell is burnt marijuana. Well, burnt marijuana doesn't necessarily allow them to search that passenger compartment of the motor vehicle. And the reason I say that it may not allow for them to do so is because that doesn't necessarily mean that something is in the vehicle. Now, of course, it could mean that there are still remnants of something in the vehicle. So arguably the officer could try to still search to see if there are any remnants of marijuana or used marijuana. But my point of that is it kind of leads to another article, another link that I'll include on here as well, is whether or not or how the individual officer can search the body of the individual through a blood draw. And what we're talking about is drunk driving. Now we're getting a little off topic, so I'm going to go back to the motor vehicle exception and have you click on the link later. And just to end that, under the motor vehicle exception, again, the officer, once they've been able to initiate the encounter with an individual inside of a vehicle, they have to be able to articulate their suspicion for criminality or contraband within that vehicle. If they're unable to do that, they're unable to use the exception that we call the motor vehicle exception, which is that they have no need for a warrant to search your vehicle. However, Another warrantless exception that we've mentioned that falls under even this exception is consent. And again, I'm going to include a link on this page, have you click on it. I urge you to click on consent. That's probably the biggest issue that we have. And until then, you guys have a great day. Talk to you soon.